Welcome back, everyone, to Disc Golf Daily on the weekends, DGPT History. This weekend, we're joined by Pete Johnson, PDGA 9009. I think it's always really interesting to get a four-digit PDGA member on the podcast. So thank you, Pete, for being here. I'm looking forward to talking to you a little bit about your involvement early on in the tour.
Sounds great. Good to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. So first off, what I like to start by asking everyone is just sort of how did you get into disc golf?
I was playing Ultimate Frisbee at the University of Arizona, and somebody bet me that I couldn't throw it as far as they could with their disc golf discs. And I showed up the next Saturday morning, even though I was hungover to see what was up, brought some lids and stuff. And the guy that bet me, I could throw it farther than him with my disc or his disc. But there was guys there that could definitely throw the disc golf disc farther than me. And the very first time I threw it out there, about 250, and it hooked left. And I just leaned back and I ripped it across my chest, because I used to go throw on the beach all the time. And I just put it out there on a giant anhyzer, and it went way out and turned over. And they're like, oh, they're like, you could play pro. And I was like, what kind of sport is this? I was like, this is some sort of joke. I was like, pro my first day. And then I met Jeff Homburg, who's the statistics and records gentleman for the PDGA, good friend of mine. And he basically told me I need to learn how to putt and do all these different things. But it was him and Dan Ginley and everybody in Arizona that got me into disc golf. I never played any more Ultimate. And I had been playing Ultimate on a team where I didn't even have to have cleats, and I had been barefoot for about 2 years when I met these guys, and they're like, you're gonna need shoes to play this. And so I had to go get shoes specifically to start playing disc golf. And I played in my first tournament in about 3 months in, and I took it down in the what was then AM2, so novice, I guess. But
yeah. So what year was that?
1994, I believe.
Okay.
94. Yeah, I think it was September 94. I got my first discs. Someone gave me a set for my birthday, so I probably just found it, like a couple weeks before that, over that summer.
Awesome. Man, so 94, that puts us at, am I counting right? 30 years.
Yeah. This year was actually 30 years. I managed to get into a couple tournaments in Australia this year, or in New Zealand and in Thailand. And then I played in the Vegas Challenge this year to make sure I got a couple tournaments in.
That's awesome. So you had been playing, I guess, disc golf for quite a while then whenever you met Steve Dodge, the founder of the tour. So I guess, how did you and Steve end up meeting?
I was friends before I moved to New England from Tucson. I moved in 2001. I had already met Jason Southwick, his cousin. So I had been taken to Jason's to play as a visiting pro, basically, and played some doubles there and met Jason and Matt Stroika and a few other people. And then I moved to Massachusetts in 2001, and from Tucson, Arizona, where I'd been. And when I moved there, I started playing, and I played in all the incarnations of the MSDGC and the Vibram, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, I think I was one of the last ones to finally miss it. It was down between me and Yeti and maybe Des and Bob, and we were down to the last ones that hadn't played in every iteration of it. But so when Steve came along to do the MSDGC, it's really when I met Steve. I guess that would be when he moved up from Virginia.
Awesome. Yeah, and so that's the MSDGC. I think is actually a good thing to maybe talk about for a little bit, because for many people, it was at the time, the way I understand it, a premier tournament, like a tournament to be at, sort of thing. And so what was what was that like? I guess moving from Tucson, then being at a place where there's a tournament that is like starting to gather pros not just from regionally but from across the country.
Well, we did have the Memorial, and I had been playing in a lot of the Vegas tournaments for years, so we had a few out there. But yeah, the first couple of years we didn't really know what we were doing. I mean, yeah, it was big, and we had a couple different courses, but most of the courses there was only a couple par fours over at Jason Southwick's, and there were still not that many par fours even on the over at Maple Hill yet. So it was a lot smaller courses for sure. It's probably what is the shortest courses now out there.
Yeah, and so just to let everyone listening sort of give them a frame of reference. If you don't know Jason Southwick, Jason runs a course in Massachusetts called Pyramids, and has also is a big part of Marshall Street Disc Golf, if you've heard of that. And so just right there across from Maple Hill. Nowadays people know Maple Hill a whole lot more because of the Pro Tour and stuff, but
Yeah,
there's a whole lot more disc golf going on in Massachusetts than just Maple Hill.
yeah. Jason had been there for 20 years already, having a course, I think, at that point.
Yeah, and so Steve and Jason are running the MSDGC. It evolves into the Vibram Open. It's on the national tour, and then Steve starts to come up with this idea of the Pro Tour. When was sort of, I guess, the first time that you heard Steve talk about the Pro Tour, and what was it like, or like what were your thoughts with his ideas there?
Well, he said he wanted to do something different, and he wanted to step it all up. And there had been rumors already that the tournament had been told that they needed to watch out how much they were paying out because they were starting to become so large, that the powers to be didn't want them paying out that much at that moment, I guess. And Steve didn't like that, I don't think, very much. And he didn't like the whole idea of the governing body holding us back at that moment. And so he came to me and asked me if I would support him. And I'm somebody who already has the finances. I've been being told, and we thought many years ago in the 90s that we should start an amateur disc golf association, which we thought would force the PDGA to be like, wait, we want to be the Amateur Disc Golf Association, because all the money was 70% of the people and all the money was in the AMs. So I had been trying to figure out a way to have at least two organizations to run the thing and stuff like that before. And Steve came along and said he wanted to run this tour. And he was going to bring it to the PDGA. And I told him then, I said, it doesn't matter if you bring it to the PDGA and they say no, because I'm in the ear of all the disc golfers. I'm on tour every year. I've been on tour every year since 08 at that point, or 07. And so, I knew all the golfers, and I told them that they would come if we just paid them. It didn't have to be sanctioned or anything. They weren't going to worry about that too much. If it was a big event, they'd be there. And I was in their ears. So it was really simple to act like we could pull it off either way.
Yeah, and so Steve's pitching this idea. Ultimately, he goes to the PDGA. The PDGA isn't quite on board with the idea of supporting it in the full sense. And so at that point, he sort of, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, turns private. He starts to look for other ways to support the tour beyond just himself. And so it's my understanding that you were one of those sort of early supporters, early investors. Besides your like already being in with the players and being on tour, what was it, I guess, with Steve's particular idea that made you say, hey, I want to support this, as opposed to maybe, I mean, at the time, whether other people knew it or not, we had the World Tour coming up.
They were all, yeah. UC asked me to support the World Tour as well, and I looked into that, but I just there was a lot of complications in giving money to a business that's not based in the U.S. So that ultimately left me with the one choice of someone to support to further disc golf. I wanted to do, I'm already known as somebody who sponsors like every tournament I've ever been in, pretty much. So I just wanted to do something more than just at that level. Because I've never been one to run any tournaments. That's not what I did. I played. So it was UC's idea was good, but I think that what Steve was going to do was better.
Awesome. And so when, like, I guess it was, how early on would you say that you came on board? I feel like in some ways you're probably kind of there from the beginning, since you're in Massachusetts already and talking to Steve maybe more regularly than others. But was it, a pretty quick, yes, I want to do this, or did you,
Oh, yeah.
have questions,
I mean, I had quite questions when it came to the financial part of it, but I knew that I was there to support him no matter what, in some form or another. It was just a matter of, working out the details, basically.
Awesome. And so I just to give the audience, I guess, some insight into things. When you say like you were a touring professional, like one of the things that I remember is even though the Pro Tour was an MPO FPO event, I still remember, for the first, I mean, all the way through 2019, we had you coming out to tournaments and competing in the open divisions, because to your point about being a person who played tournaments, you were there to play. You weren't all that interested in helping run, and so that was always a highlight for me, being out at the early tour events, is seeing you out there scraping it with the big dogs.
Well, I appreciate it. And every now and then I'd get off a good round, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. And I wanted to compete with them until it became, separated like it is now and the way it is now. And I always said, guys, someday, 1,000 rated pro isn't going to be on tour, and I never made it to 1,000 ever. The highest I was ever rated was like 976, I think, maybe 978. But that, the ratings have changed as well, but over time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's the truth. That's the excuse that I tell most people when my rating goes down, is that the ratings have changed over time.
Exactly.
So I guess when the goal of the podcast really is to sort of tell the history, sort of give people an insight into the people that were behind sort of the starting of the tour. And I mean, outside of like some monetary investment, what other things, and I apologize because I didn't start with the tour till 2017, so I don't know even fully, like, in those early years, what other things besides just the monetary and sort of verbal support did you help play a role in? With the tour?
It was mostly just spreading the news to the other pros that this was happening. There was a lot of mixed sentiment to it. A lot more people than I thought were like, well, if the PDGA doesn't want to do it, we may not do it. And I have a feeling a lot of that was pressure from the disc golf manufacturers to have them, sign up to tournaments that are PDGA sanctioned. So. But it never became a problem because they jumped on board. They realized it was coming either way.
It's so wild to me to think back how much tournaments have changed, especially on the Pro Tour, from when it started in 2016 to where it is today. To like people may hear you say, I was out there talking to pros and like convincing them. But like the reality is that tournaments, A tiers, national tours, even worlds, back in the early 2010s, it was still very much community driven, and there wasn't this like separation of like an elite level touring player. It was all just one happy disc golf family, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yeah, there was only a couple people that didn't travel on the main tour. Some of the guys that were 1020 rated when everybody else was 1035 rated, some of those guys went on, they just kind of mapped out their own A tier tour. But most of them were out there, and those guys are still on the pro tour today. Still grinding. Captain of Discraft there was one of them. So he was out there grinding A tiers and trying to get to the big events as well.
Yeah, and so like when Pete's talking about how he was sort of out there spreading the word and trying to convince people, it wasn't always this like everyone's going to the same events. To your point, Paul would be out there finding different A tiers that he could play at, and so I think that even in saying like, hey, I was out there talking to people, like that's a pretty big step just to be the word of mouth. I mean, um, the the before the internet, and this is, I mean, obviously the pro tour is in the internet time, but before the internet, the way that people found tournaments was through word of mouth, and it's really been sort of, I guess, one of the key stalwarts of growing the sport, even for us, is just getting out there and telling friends, whether it's about professionals like the pro tour or even just saying, hey, come play disc golf, or hey, you can throw this. I bet you can't throw this disc golf disc farther than you can throw a lid.
Yeah, no, I agree. And there's the thing about telling everybody is, there was worlds where you'd see everybody, but other than that, there was some really good pros that just didn't go. The NTs had kind of started to disintegrate in the early 2010s. Not as many people were going to them. People were talking about the courses were too small. They weren't able to be played in the same way as they were. Records were being set. And so, there was people like Matty that was, down in Alabama, and he just stayed down there and won all the A tiers within a 200 or 300 mile radius, came to Worlds, got second place a lot, and he's still out there grinding. So a lot of those guys were local pros still that needed to be convinced that there was enough money out on tour to support them.
Yeah, and I mean, and Matt's a great example of someone who even made that decision late. Him and Garrett and a few others, were really high level pros that were competing regionally, and then sort of weren't there consistently for the first start of the tour, but now are just right out there,
Yep.
placing in the top even still. And that's Matt, for me, I'm from Arkansas originally, so going to the Southern Nationals Championships in 2014, first time that I ever saw like a pro Final Nine, and Matt was obviously one of the first guys that I saw because it was Southern Nationals, So,
Yep.
um, so yeah, but it's really great to see where things have come from. In this season of the podcast, we're really focusing sort of on that pre-launch of like what it was like in 2015 to go into 2016. But I really, while I have you here, I'd love to hear just sort of like your perspective on how things have gone, from when you first, agreed to support Steve with the tour to where it is now. Like, is it what you thought it would be? Is it better than what you thought it would be? Like what's that sort of mindset?
Well, I think that, it's had its growing pains. There for the first couple of years, I felt like I was going around and telling, and I'd have to be like, guys, I'm part of it. And, because people were like, this thing sucks. We don't like this anymore. We don't want to have to do this. And I was like, you guys do realize I'm an investor. And so, I can take what you say back to other people and let them know. But other than that, since I've left Mass, I haven't had a lot to do with much, stopping playing as much, COVID, and haven't really continued to the same extent. I got a course in my yard. I can play there when I want to. But I think that the level that the payout level is absolutely astounding. I remember in 2012, somebody pointed out that the world's payout had been the same now for about 10 years. So since about 2000, 2002, the world's payouts were very, very similar. And that was the main goal, was to make it so that people could earn a living. Therefore, other people could earn a living around the sport. To think that there's caddies and stuff now, and all this stuff. I mean, I didn't even keep track of my aces because I thought that would be like keeping track of your aces in miniature golf. That's the way I looked at it when we started. I was looking for a sport to play, and disc golf kind of fell in my lap. Is what happened for me. So.
Yeah, that's some great insight. When you said caddies, I think, I don't think that Brad ever thought caddying for Yuli would be like as much work as what he did whenever he was playing professionally.
Right.
And
Exactly.
and it's the growing the payouts. The Pro Tour has kept reinvesting and growing the payouts, so much so to a point that on even to the majors, right, with Worlds, and sort of their alignment with the tour, the PDGA has looked at sort of capping it at percentage increases each year, because they don't want to just blow all of the other tournaments out of the water. They also don't want to set unrealistic expectations of like, hey, we've got to grow the purse, by 10% or 40% every year, or whatever it
Right.
is, because other sports, people like to compare us to other sports and say, hey, their payouts are so much bigger. But I think it is sort of important to note that in the past 5 to 6 years, we actually have seen very strong percentage growth in the payouts, to a point to where it's now sustainable for people to tour. And that's, I tell the person who introduced me to disc golf all the time, like, I don't think when he introduced me to the sport that he ever thought I'd work full time, and he was, he is actually pretty high up in the PDGA at one point, and he never worked full time or full time in disc golf. He's a an everyday blue collar worker, and so it's just been phenomenal to see. I know, Pete, you and I have seen each other at tournaments, but like, I started with Steve in 2017 as a volunteer, and so that's sort of the grassroots that it's all come from. And
Yeah, you were just out on
grow.
tour helping, right?
Yes, yeah. Steve said, "Hey, I need someone to help with social media," and I volunteered, and then I showed up to Ledgestone that year because one of my friends was playing, and Steve looked at me and goes, "You should probably be at all of these." And I said, well, if you can pay for me to get there, then I can come. And
Right.
And it just sort of grew from there. And it's been a wild ride, but I think, my goal with this podcast, as I've said from the beginning, is really to help showcase all of the different people involved. I think that there's a lot of people it's sort of twofold. There's a lot of people who think the Pro Tour is just this massive conglomerate, and like, why aren't they doing more, because they should have more people. But then there's also the realization that, especially from 2016 to 2018, the Pro Tour was only 4 to 5 people with 3 to 4 investors behind it.
Yeah.
There wasn't like a lot going on into it. And I love your anecdote about people complaining and you having to be like, well, guys, I'm part of this. I can do something. One of the things that Steve and I found super valuable was, when I was out there doing social media, I was able to hear the players talk about things as they played,
Right.
and that was, on the course feedback that you can't get when you're just one person. And also, people, maybe for Steve being the guy running it, they maybe don't want to take it to him. But it definitely has grown, and it's been great to have, people like you who sort of stepped in at the beginning to help give it the push that it needed.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you talking with me, Seth. It's really going to be interesting to see this all put together.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. I don't really have much else to talk about. If you have anything else you want to add before we wrap, feel free. Otherwise, we'll call it a night.
That sounds good.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Have a great one. Yes.
You too.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share. It really does help us grow.